Linda Thompson believed she was stepping into a fairy tale the night she met Elvis Presley. A private movie theater, late-night conversation, and the unmistakable charm of a legend. But just hours after their first date, her phone rang, and what she heard on the other end left her stunned. Elvis sounded completely out of it, slurring, rambling, barely coherent. Linda assumed the worst, that he'd been drinking. But what she discovered weeks later wasn't just shocking. It was something far more dangerous hidden beneath the glitz, and it would change everything she thought she knew. It was 1972 when a young Linda Thompson, full of life and curiosity, was invited to a private movie screening at the Memphian Theater in Memphis. The invitation came from Bill Browder, a trusted record promoter who had a feeling she'd hit it off with someone special that night. What she didn't expect was to be introduced to the king of rock and roll himself, Elvis Presley. As the lights dimmed and the theater buzzed with quiet anticipation, Linda found herself in the presence of a man whose magnetic charm filled the room more powerfully than the film on screen. From the moment they began talking, something clicked. Elvis wasn't just a global icon. He was warm, funny, and intensely interested in Linda. The two of them lingered long after the movie ended, trading stories and laughs into the early hours of the morning. By the time Linda finally stepped out into the quiet Memphis night, it was 4 a.m., and she was floating on the kind of excitement that only follows an unforgettable first date. Everything about the night felt magical, effortless even. It seemed like the beginning of something rare. But just when she thought the evening had come to a close, her phone rang. On the other end was Elvis. Only this time, his voice was strange, slurred, dazed, and almost incoherent. The warmth was still there, but something about the way he spoke stopped Linda in her tracks. She was confused. He hadn't touched a drink at the theater, so why did he now sound like he could barely keep his thoughts straight? Her heart sank a little as suspicion crept in. Could the man who'd just swept her off her feet already be hiding something? As Linda held the phone to her ear, she tried to make sense of the voice on the other end. It was unmistakably Elvis, yet something about him felt off. His words were slow, his tone syrupy, almost like he was trying to push each sentence through a heavy fog. The Elvis she had spent the night talking with was sharp, charismatic, and completely in control. But now in the stillness of her home, he sounded like someone else entirely. The contrast was jarring. Linda couldn't help but wonder, what had changed in just a few hours? Confused and slightly uneasy, she turned to her Aunt Betty and whispered, "Gee, I think he might have been drinking." It was the only explanation that seemed to make sense in that moment. There had been no sign of alcohol at the theater, no glass in hand, no smell, no stumble in his step. And yet now he sounded as if he'd just stumbled out of a bar at closing time. The pieces didn't quite fit, but she pushed the thought aside, brushing it off as something that might make more sense later. Still, the strangeness of the call didn't end with his slurred speech. Elvis grew unusually intense, emotionally charged in a way that didn't match their brief time together. In a voice that drifted between dreamy and desperate, he told her he was so happy he met her, that he needed to be with her, and even asked where she'd been all his life. These weren't casual compliments or flirtatious banter. They were bold declarations, the kind that might be expected months into a romance, not hours. Linda felt flattered, but beneath the surface, a quiet alarm began to ring. Something wasn't right. Weeks passed, and Linda found herself whisked into a whirlwind of glitz and glamour that only someone like Elvis could offer. Their connection deepened quickly, and before long, she was flying with him to Las Vegas, a city that matched his larger-than-life presence perfectly. It was an exciting escape, filled with rehearsals, luxury suites, and the thrilling pace of a performer's life on the road. To the outside world, it was a fairy tale. But for Linda, reality was beginning to whisper something different. On their very first night in Vegas, that whisper became louder. As they stood outside under the city lights, Elvis was as affectionate and sweet as ever, but something was off, again. His words were slightly blurred, his steps uneven. He leaned into her as if the weight of the world was pressing down on him. Linda's mind raced. This wasn't déjà vu. It was real. The slurred speech she had first heard over the phone was now happening right in front of her. She looked at him, gently asked, "Are you okay?" And that's when he offered a casual, almost dismissive reply. "Oh, I'm okay, honey. I just had a little sleeping pill." It was the kind of explanation that felt too easy, too rehearsed. Linda tried to brush it off, wanting to believe it was nothing more than a one-time remedy for exhaustion. After all, Elvis was constantly under pressure. Late nights, intense rehearsals, adoring crowds. Maybe he just needed help winding down. But deep inside, something in her shifted. She realized this wasn't the first time he'd sounded like this, and it likely wouldn't be the last. As their time together continued, what seemed like an isolated moment began to repeat itself. The late-night slurring, the dreamy pauses, the uneven steps, they became familiar patterns. Linda started to connect the dots, slowly understanding that what she was witnessing wasn't a random quirk of stardom or the toll of a demanding schedule. It was something far more routine, something he didn't seem to see as unusual at all. And for Linda, that quiet realization marked the beginning of a much deeper concern, one she couldn't yet name, but could no longer ignore. As the days turned into weeks, Linda found herself observing more than just the glamour of being close to Elvis. She began noticing the subtleties behind the curtain. The late-night calls with slurred words, the sudden shifts in energy, and the moments when Elvis seemed just a little too far removed from reality. All of it began to form a picture she couldn't ignore. It slowly dawned on her that what she had initially mistaken for drinking wasn't alcohol at all. It was something else, something quieter, less obvious and far more complicated. The more time she spent with him, the clearer it became. This was a pattern, not a one-off moment. In hindsight, Linda would admit she had been unprepared for the world she was stepping into. "I wish I had been more worldly," she would later say, her words carrying the weight of both regret and innocence. She hadn't grown up around this kind of behavior. To her, love was supposed to be light and freeing, not heavy with concern and confusion. But now she was caught between her feelings for Elvis and the growing realization that his habits weren't simply about relaxation or the occasional night of excess. They were part of a deeper routine that was already embedded in his everyday life. The more she saw, the more she understood how much he depended on these substances just to maintain his rhythm, just to function. And the scariest part? Elvis didn't seem to notice. To him, this was just life. There was no acknowledgement, no discussion, no urgency. But for Linda, the glamour was starting to dim. Behind the adoring fans and flashing lights, there was a man slipping into something much harder to escape, and she was beginning to understand that love alone might not be enough to stop it. After the monumental success of the Aloha from Hawaii special, a moment that solidified Elvis's iconic status on a global scale, Linda expected life to become more stable, more joyful. But what followed was something entirely different. In the months after the broadcast, subtle shifts in Elvis's behavior began to emerge, and then quickly grew harder to ignore. There was a heaviness to him now, not just physically, but emotionally. What had once been a charming eccentricity started to feel like something unraveling behind the scenes. Linda, once caught up in the awe of his celebrity, began to see a different side, one that no camera ever captured. It wasn't just the slurred speech anymore. Linda began noticing moments where Elvis seemed visibly impaired even during the day, detached from the world around him. He would drift in and out of conversations, repeat himself, or withdraw completely, leaving her feeling like she was watching someone fade before her eyes. His eating habits changed too, becoming more intense, more frequent, perhaps another attempt to fill a void he couldn't explain. His once controlled appearance began to shift with noticeable weight gain, but when Linda gently raised concerns, she was met with a firm wall of denial. Elvis brushed everything off as if nothing had changed, his charisma still intact but hollow in its deflection. Linda said nothing, at least not out loud. She kept her worry close, tucked behind smiles and silent support, unsure of how to confront something she didn't fully understand. She didn't want to accuse, didn't want to push him away, but each day made it harder to pretend that everything was fine. The man the world adored was still there, but slowly, piece by piece, something inside him was slipping away. And Linda, helpless to stop it, could only watch. There comes a point in every love story when hope begins to quietly dim. For Linda, that moment didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, day by day, as she watched the man she cared for drift further into a place she couldn't reach. She tried everything: compassion, patience, gentle concern, quiet support. But no matter how tightly she held on, the person she once saw so clearly began to fade behind a growing wall of habits and silence. And in one devastating realization, she spoke the words that would haunt her for years to come. He was going to go ahead and slowly kill himself, no matter what I did. That truth settled deep in her heart, heavy and unrelenting. She loved him. There was no question about that. But love, as she learned, doesn't always save someone. Sometimes it becomes a front row seat to their unraveling. She begged silently for change, waited for signs of recognition, clung to brief moments of clarity that gave her hope. But those moments became fewer and farther between. She came to see that staying might not heal him. It might only break her. And so, with more sorrow than anger, more grief than blame, Linda made the most painful choice she'd ever faced. She walked away. Leaving didn't feel like freedom. It felt like failure. But deep down, she knew she had reached the end of what love alone could do. She wasn't leaving a man she didn't care about. She was leaving because she cared too much. And watching him slip away without any power to help had become unbearable. In the quiet that followed, all she had left were the memories of who he was and the ache of who he was becoming. Looking back, it's hard for Linda not to replay that first phone call, the moment everything began to change. It had seemed so innocent at the time, just a slurred voice late at night, a call from someone she had just spent a magical evening with. She brushed it off as nerves, or maybe a drink taken after a long night. But in truth, that call was the first glimpse behind the velvet curtain, the first warning sign that something deeper, something more unsettling, was quietly at play. It was the spark that would ignite years of confusion, heartache, and ultimately, understanding. What sounded like drunken slurring, Linda later admitted, was something far more dangerous and far more tragic. In those early days, she had no way of knowing the full scope of what she was hearing. It wasn't just a voice slowed by fatigue or a rare indulgence. It was a signal, masked and muffled, of a struggle taking root far beneath the surface. It would take weeks, then months for her to fully grasp the weight of it. And once she did, the innocence of that first enchanted night would be replaced by a far more complex and painful reality, one that didn't come with easy answers or a happy ending. And yet Linda didn't come forward with her story for attention or praise. She didn't speak out to tarnish a legend or rewrite history. She shared her truth because, for so long, the world only saw the spotlight. Very few saw the shadows it cast. Her story was never about scandal. It was about shedding light on what really happened behind the scenes. It was about love, heartbreak, and the haunting realization that even icons are human. And sometimes their greatest battles are the ones no one ever sees. If you found this story as moving and eye-opening as we did, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a moment of the real stories behind the legends. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Linda made the right decision? What would you have done in her shoes? Share your opinions in the comments below, and don't forget to share this video with fellow Elvis fans. Your voice helps keep these powerful conversations alive,